Let's see, this is my first time doing this. Sharing my screen, and now I click desktop and share. Maybe if everyone can let me know if you can see.
We can see it, Casey. It looks good.
Okay, let me get over here. How's this?
That's perfect.
What's the name of the dog?
So this is Moira. Moira is a he dog that we just rescued about a year ago, and this was taken yesterday. I'm just finishing up our fall seeding acres. We finished 200 acres of spelt yesterday, and this dog rides with me just like that all day long. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Mary, for all your words. There lots of different thoughts that I had in my mind that hopefully we can talk more about. But so I think what I'm going to do is flash through a bunch of slides and images from about who we are on our farm, and maybe we can get into some more discussion. Bear with me, I am a farmer, so I haven't used Zoom very much. This is my first time. So this is how some of our fields look now. We are a dryland grain, small grains farm. There's a lot of wheat in our area traditionally. About 15 years ago, I started practicing organic farming, which includes a lot of diversity, less chemicals, both as far as in-crop sprays and nitrogen fertilizers. So a lot of our fields have a lot of flowers around them that generally would be considered weeds, but this is a field of wheat and alfalfa. The previous 3 years of this field had alfalfa on it. And it's a perennial legume that fixes nitrogen from the air. So when we drive down the road, there's a lot of, this is one of the big aha moments for me, was that the edges of our fields were not bare anymore from the chemicals that were sprayed. Didn't kill the grasses and didn't kill the perennial forages. That the extra benefit of having 1,000 acres in organic is that you have a lot of diversity that you didn't necessarily even expect. I'm going through some pictures that are some experimental risks that I took over the last decade. What I'm standing in is a dead mat of yellow sweet clover. Part of regenerative organic agriculture is trying to keep the soil covered, fixing all your fertility from the atmosphere, and in order to feed soil organisms. So this was an attempt at a yellow sweet clover field that we rolled and put that dead mat on top of the ground to protect it through the winter and feed those soil organisms while fixing enough nitrogen for the next crop year. We also entered cows into our equation, which I'm still regretting. So our fencing is getting better at this point. So the cows are where they're supposed to be at the moment, I think. The result of bringing cows across our farm rather than in one confined area is that a cow can process grasses. They're like a big microbe vat. They take the alfalfa we produce and they utilize about 20% to make their meat, their bones, their beans, and the rest goes out their rear end, and it is a soil building phenomenon. So this was an intensely grazed area where the cows were there and then gone, and what we have the following year are these deep green healthy patches of grass. Here is Kelsey. She's our #1 lentil farmer on the farm. This is a field of crimson lentils. So, you know, traditionally, we would have a wheat, summer fallow, rotation. That has become much more complex, and part of that complexity are these shallow fibrous rooted legumes. They are very efficient with moisture. They have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that allows them to fix atmospheric nitrogen. So their input cost for a farm is basically just the seed and the fuel to get the farming done, and they contribute nitrogen to themselves and then have a credit for the next crop. This is a another part of our mix. So after we've gone from a 2-year rotation to a 9-year rotation on our farm. The first 3 years is that alfalfa, and alfalfa is a very tiny plant its first year, and it's amazing. The seed is comparable to a mustard seed, and you only seed 7 pounds of that over an entire acre. And so the first year, there's little tiny alfalfa seeds planted under this mix. So this is part of our response to try to answer what the soil health needs to feed microorganisms. Each one of these species has a different kind of carbon exudate that when these plants pull in CO2 from the air, each links up with a specific organism in the ground and feeds that organism in exchange for mineralization. And underneath this, we have alfalfa that would then live for the next 3 years in this field. And this is, a few months later, we harvested this crop, and now it looks like this. These photos were taken yesterday. This is the little tiny alfalfa coming up through the residue of this stubble field. What's really fascinating about this is with regenerative organic farming, you have this relay exchange. You try to never have bare soil, and you try to always have a living root in the ground. And so when I see that I actually got a good stand of this alfalfa, I click my heels. I'm so excited, and I just like to share it with everybody. Another thing we're trying are ancient grains. This is one of the oldest grains in the world. This is einkorn. All of our wheats, modern wheats, come from this. This is the same plant. These two colors both represent einkorn. We're growing in the same field. There's not the uniformity that you see, but what there is a lot of residue for the soil. There is the ability, these plants have the ability to find nitrogen and be efficient with nitrogen that our modern wheats don't. Here are a couple more photos of what we're trying to do. Picture the fields that you drive and see when you're moving around Montana that are bare, those summer fallow fields. This is what our summer fallow looks like. This is all taken in June, except for the ones in the snow. So summer fallow has worked really well. The banking industry in Montana has supported it. Our farm programs have supported it. What I am advocating for is summer fallow 2.0. We have a limited amount of moisture in dryland Montana. However, we have a lot of moisture at certain points, and plants can take that moisture, use it, and then what we have to do is terminate it. The two pictures of the tractor tire, I'm mowing to terminate. The roller, I'm rolling to terminate. For organic, we have to use tillage in order to completely terminate these plants so they stop using moisture, start feeding soil life, and start moving around that nutrition for next year's plant. The bales are what we would do with our alfalfa. We bale graze in the winter, so we lay out this grid, and then we turn cows in using an electric fence so that we can move those cows across our most infertile areas that need the most help. So we've gone from raising wheat that primarily is shipped overseas as a commodity that Mary talked about in her first red ring, to this, which kind of represents the 2 rings down from that. I think it was a green ring. The strategic partners is kind of what we've moved into. So we've raised as many as 16 crops. I think this year we had 16 crops and 16 different markets. So when we're talking about regenerative ideas, roots, microbes, and stable markets, I think, are what I'd like to emphasize. And if I really think about it, those are the big movements that are happening across industry. So on the left is nitrogen, on the right is nitrogen. Traditionally, we put down about 100 units of nitrogen per acre to grow a good winter wheat crop. In 2006, my gracious father said I could try 50 acres organic, and I put it into alfalfa, straight alfalfa, which is the plant on the right. 3 years later, we took that out and planted our winter wheat crop. And we had a side-by-side comparison of a non-organic, conventionally farmed wheat with this organic crop that was, all we planted was the seed. No fungicide seed treatment, no fertilizer, no chemical to get rid of the weeds. And that winter wheat crop out-yielded the non-organic crop, as well as had a higher protein. The protein based off of the urea prills in the blue gloved hand. Generally, we shoot for about 12.5% protein. The alfalfa on the right, our protein was 15% plus with just the seed. And that just blew my mind. And from there, I realized it all had to do with the microbes in the soil, these little tiny invisible creatures that now we're learning are part of our digestive tracts and on our skin and in our homes, and may be contributing to a lot of the asthma, inflammation, even to the point of cancer and depression because of the lack of diversity of microbes that we have. That alfalfa plant has a symbiotic relationship with a tiny bacteria organism that allows it to fix this tank of nitrogen that we all live in, but it is such a stable atmospheric element that it takes this special relationship that that bacteria can offer to the plant to bring in that nitrogen to a plant available form. Beyond that, so this photo is a photo of mycorrhizal fungi hyphae. And the real dark block at the end is called an arbuscule. So this is kind of a step up from the bacteria soil ecosystem. And that if you have fungus in your soil, a healthy fungus, in population that is in relationship to that bacteria, what that means is that you start to have a healthy soil. And so basically you have all these bacteria that are feeding on the root balls, the carbon that the plant is secreting into the soil. And these bacteria start to become numerous. And if they're numerous enough, then these big fungal guys come along and they start eating those. This particular fungus actually also forms a symbiotic relationship with plants. And so we dug up a bunch of plants across our rotation, and I made friends with a lady who is a soil mycologist in Missoula, and I take root samples to her and say, hey, do I have good inoculation in my roots? And her grad students just must like me, I don't know. So they decided to do this for free. And they sent me these photos back. And this is a tiny strand of an alfalfa plant root. And those little tiny look like little ink marks are the actual fungus that had invaded our root of our alfalfa plant. So I think one thing we're talking about carbon a lot with this regenerative conversation, but this photo on the right here is an alfalfa root carcass. So this has existed on the top of this field I just picked this up this last week as we were seeding our winter crops into it. That plant carcass holds nitrogen. So if you look at that, those white prills of that urea, if you spread that on your lawn, you put your sprinkler on it, it immediately becomes soluble and runs off. If you put your sprinkler on that alfalfa root, it's going to sit there until you have some beneficial microbes come along, get some heat activity, they start chewing on it, and it starts to release that nitrogen. That alfalfa plant is not going to run off into our rivers and streams. So there's this exponential, just incredible distance between the type of nitrogen that is on synthetic, non-organic industrial farming models versus this biological nitrogen that comes from fixing nitrogen through actual life. So we have to remember carbon is life, and within life has all of these cycles: nitrogen, carbon, mineralization, lots of bugs. So I will say I am still farming both organic and non-organically, and there's a lot of gray areas when you get down into the trade. And so I'd like to make sure that if there are any farmers in this conference, that we need to not demonize anyone, that the complexity of growing food is unbelievably, it's an unbelievably big thing. And we all have to work together on this. And I think everyone should be trying a little bit of these biological ideas across their rotation in their farm. I'm just going to move on. So Liz Carlisle wrote the book Lentil Underground, and I'm one of the farmers in that. And there's a community of farmers, and thanks to David Oyen and the Lentil Timeless Seeds. And from that book, lots of great activity has continued. Liz Carlisle has worked with Bob Quinn to write his book, and she continues to write and be involved on the community level, as she's also being a teacher in Santa Barbara, professor in Santa Barbara. And this is a publication that she put together that for Patagonia and the Land Institute, as they are developing this perennial wheat. And this is West Jackson. But back to this slide, I wanted to emphasize one more time that we need to focus on nitrogen. In their research, says perhaps the most dramatic finding that they found with this Kernza alfalfa mix, this grass legume mix, is that there's another potent greenhouse gas associated with agriculture, nitrous oxide. Per molecule, nitrous oxide is 300 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. Annual cropping systems can lose a lot of nitrogen. So if you have a period of the year when there are no roots in the ground, no uptake, nitrogen accumulates and tends to migrate either down into the groundwater or up into the atmosphere. So once again, I think that the contrast between using that synthetic nitrogen that's so soluble, that can run into our streams, with perennial legumes that naturally fix nitrogen, or a lentil that naturally fixes nitrogen, the implications of that are really unbelievable. We're planting some Kernza. This is a perennial wheat that West Jackson has been working on for a long time. The root systems of these grasses are like what was once on the prairie. They're just incredible, and they link directly up with creating homes and grocery stores, basically, for the microbes in our soil. And once that happens, I kind of see it like a Roth IRA account. It's exponential. When all of these pieces come together, it holds more water, which creates more photosynthesis, brings more carbon in. It stabilizes nitrogen. And once nitrogen is stable, it's available for slow release next year when it is ready. So I put this slide as I was listening to Mary, like, what should we do? And I think this conference is part of that. We make friends with each other. And Timeless Seeds, David Oyen, Liz Carlisle, and I spelled lentil wrong. it's making these connections and answering our personal questions that we have about our bodies, about where our food is coming from, and what is happening around us. And we can do that through these organizations and these networks, Montana Organic Association, etc. Part of that network that has happened is, for me personally, is connecting with General Mills. We created a product through Annie's. General Mills had bought Annie's. And this product, speaking of health, is full of sugar and processed food. But the emphasis of this were these regenerative ideas. And when big companies are getting involved, wanting to change the world, solve climate change, huge things happen very quickly. And so we have entered into a few 3-year contracts, myself and my friend Nate, creating these products and emphasizing their identity preservation, as well as these regenerative ideas. And so Beth is my connection. I think she's just awesome. She's got so much style, but she has been swept away by these regenerative ideas and is taking General Mills down that path, and especially championing native pollinators, and then all the regenerative ideas that help support those insects. This is from a soil botany book that I have still from Missoula, from the University of Montana, that I just think we need to look at these ideas about soil life and the vast amount of organisms that exist. See, I can't really read the whole thing because these photos are over the top of them, but if everyone can just read that slide. So 1 kilogram contains 2 trillion bacteria, 400 million fungi, 30 million protozoa, nematodes, earthworms. Organisms mix and refine the soil. For instance, one earthworm can digest more than a ton of soil in a year. Aristotle called it the intestines of the earth. They aerate and refine the soil by processing it through their guts, and they add humus. They decompose this decaying organic material to the soil. And once humus becomes, once organic matter becomes broken down into what we call humus, it's incredibly stable. It can last in the soil for hundreds of years. And that humus has what they call a cation exchange capacity. It's the ability to hold and exchange nutrients. So I have another slide here coming up, but first, the sheer biomass of microbes weighs more than 2.5 tons. It's similar to a large SUV. Fathoming this is like trying to chart every star in our galaxy. There are billions and billions of microbes. And this is from an article that I sent to Connie. I think she's going to share it on the Facebook page, in Successful Farmer, which is kind of more of a mainstream magazine that are highlighting some of Dr. David Montgomery's work, specifically the hidden half of nature is what his book is called. He also wrote Dirt, and recently a book about farmers. But the connection between our guts, our bodies, the soil, our food is really coming together. More about the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Someone should let me know how much time I have left, because I'm going to rattle on here. But these 2 soil tests are biology tests. And the 2 things I wanted to emphasize really quick are, if you look here, there's zeros, and on the right, there are an 8.67 and a 3.09. So those zeros are from a worn out farm field that had been tilled for a long time, and then we had gone into no-till farming using glyphosate, but it was just wheat, summer fallow wheat. And then the other field has been in native grasses, and then an organic system that we're incorporating green manure crops. So those zeros represent how much fungi, specifically arbuscule, mycorrhizal, arbuscule fungi, and protozoa. And those two numbers indicate a higher food chain. So it's just fascinating to me that this is what we've got to work with. And now we are inoculating our seeds that we plant with life instead of with fungicides. So we're trying to bring those numbers up, and we're using cover crops to feed the soil and feed those species that we're trying to reincorporate into our soils. This is the article I was talking about that's in Successful Farming that everyone should read. It's so fascinating. Talking about the decline in nutrients in our food and how that's linked with our soil health. I think Connie was going to put that on Facebook.
Yes, I'll make sure that happens for you, Casey. Thanks.
And so this is my last slide. We're supposed to have an action item. So, and so I sent this first bullet to Connie. Montana Organic Association is working with Grow Montana, specifically on the Soil Health Committee subcommittee. And they're putting together a draft bill for the Montana State Legislature. And that is available for everyone to read and to talk about. Mary probably is working on that too. Coming up, there's a Northern Plains Resource Council Soil Health Workshop, and you can probably just Google that and it'll pop up on the Northern Plains website. Farmers Union is doing an awesome job. I would highly recommend becoming a member of that. Markets are huge. I'd say eat all your lentils and buy organic food and get to know some of these bigger farmers, like through that Liz talks about in the Lentil Underground. And then beyond the organic farms, conventional non-organic farms are also getting more diverse, which is a great movement, and starting to think about the soil life. And so a big message and something I'm trying to embody is that, and actually our last ag director from Montana, Ron DeYoung, he said it very well, that Montana agriculture is like a bucket of rocks, then there's sand that fills in around those rocks, and then you fill the rest of the bucket up with water. So there's to make a full bucket of Montana agriculture, it takes lots of different parts. And every one of those parts I can see moving in a positive direction towards some of these regenerative organic ideas, honestly. There's still a lot of work to be done as far as the amount of pesticides that are sprayed and the type of synthetic fertilizers that are being put on. And there's too much runoff happening. But I think as more of this becomes mainstream, a lot of that will move in good ways. So I think the work of faith communities is to find creative ways to bring everyone into that conversation. So celebrating the diversity of Montana farms. Vote, big time, vote. Create community, and have a compost pit in your backyard, plant a garden, and become a farmer. So that's all I have, if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Casey. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we go into the breakout room? I've put the screenshot of this slide into the chat, so you can download that and take a look at it as far as action items. And I've also given the survey link to the scribes. So if you don't have any questions, maybe Casey, you could stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
And I can just take a look and see if there are any questions.
I have a question, Connie.
All right, Ann, go ahead.
That was amazing, Casey. Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, how have your neighbors reacted to the kinds of experiments and results that you have been doing and getting. I'm wondering if they're starting to think that maybe they'd like to dip their toe in the same water, or they're kind of waiting to see for a little longer.
It's a hard question. That's a hard question to answer because there are so many cultures and subcultures that people trust in agriculture. And I have moved I'm starting to rely on a community of organic farmers that aren't, that, you know, my neighbors might not necessarily rub shoulders with as much. And I'm constantly, there are more and more of my traditionally conventional neighbors who are becoming friends and partnering with the organic community. But to change your system on a farm is incredibly challenging. Farms plan, you know, 5 years in advance on some of this, and the support system that they have in order to make those risky decision-making moves is very, very complex. And I'm thankful that I was a religious studies music major with big crazy ideas that wasn't necessarily that got, you know, working in the inner city of San Francisco and traveling to Guatemala gives you a new lease on life that I was privileged enough to have. So I guess to answer your question specifically, people are putting perennials into their rotations as of the last couple of years. So I think that in 3 or 4 years, those perennials will turn around and benefit them for decades to come. And so those small moves, these few years will really pay off, I think.
So Casey, I have one question. If we're just like a gardener in our own backyard, how do we, when our garden is finished, do you just recommend that we leave everything planted, not pull it up or put it in a compost? What's the best way to protect the soil for next year?
That's a great question. There are a few things you can do. Say if your garden right now is coming to the end of its season, it is good to take those plants away for disease issues. And if you do put them in a thriving compost just eliminates disease issues, and then you can put that back onto your garden in a few years. But mulching a garden with grass and brown leaves just to protect that soil is really important. There's an extension lady named Helen Atro from Missoula. You can actually find some of her YouTube videos. When I started doing gardening, I really followed what she was doing, that we would plant a clover of some kind between the rows of our garden. And this nitrogen fixing clover, we could then run our lawnmower down or a weed whacker, and as that clover grew, it would be fixing the nitrogen really for the next year's crop and mulching the current crop. So then the following year, you could take out that clover from those that you had planted and then plant your vegetables there. And so that's basically what I'm doing on our farm over 5,000 acres is taking that nitrogen fixing plant, incorporating it, and then planting my grains into that the following year. And Helen has some great videos about that online.
How do you spell her last name there? Is it A-T-R-O?
It's like A-T-T-H-R-O-W-E, something like that. I think I'd let Google guide me a little bit on that. If Mary Stein is on, she might know her.
It's A-T-T-H-O-W-E.
And is she at the MSU Gallatin Extension or no? She's which city? In Helena? Here she is.
She was in Missoula, and I've kind of lost track of where she is now. Mary, do you know?
I'll put that in the chat here.
I don't know, Casey, but I think there's somebody else on the group who has more info.
All right, and I have one more question. Can you talk at all about any conversations you've had with Senator Tester, as they surely farm not too far from you, do they?
They do. It's unbelievable that Senator Tester still does the farming, he and Charla. He doesn't have too much time for casual conversations, and I'm quite a ways away from him. But I have more of just a funny story that when we started growing chickpeas in our area, I got a very serious call from Washington, D.C. that Senator Tester wanted to talk to me about something. And so I said, okay. And they patched me through and said, okay, here's a senator. And he said, hey, Casey, how do you grow chickpeas? So he is just so absolutely involved and cares for our communities.
All right. Well, thank you, Casey. Thank you very much.
Connie,
Yes.
can I add one thing there? Robin Kelson asked a question that I think a couple of people have indicated that they'd love to hear about it, Casey, can you share more about what stable market means as a Montana farmer, especially with the goal around feeding Montanans?
With the goal around feeding Montanans, I think one thing that I brought up in that last group discussion, as we have connected with and made friends with people through these organic communities, not only have I been able to decide like these crops are good for my rotation and this is what I think I should do next year, but to connect and actually allow that to happen, I need a market. I need that crop to go somewhere. And a lot of my crops are now being consumed by other Montana farms. For instance, Lifeline Dairy south of Missoula and Malthea Dairy in Bozeman. And so those, when I went away, when I increasingly went away from the commodity market selling to Columbia Grain, the biggest risk was, can I get rid of this product? Will there be someone there? And I think that's always the question. And so we need to feed the world, and we need to feed the world and Montana in a timely way so that farmers like myself have cash. They have cash flowing through our system. And that really can't stop for very long or we get in trouble. So stable, and as far as a whole organic world, when markets, when our economy stalls for a moment, it affects everyone, and that can be addressed from national politics down to local politics to the support of our organic program. And I think our markets, especially the organic program market, is so important on so many levels. I mean, it's become a global economy. It's become part of our global economy, and it's become, as close to the farmer's market where you can go buy carrots from someone and so I'm kind of in the middle. I'm selling to 10 to 20,000 bushels of a grain to like a Lifeline Dairy or these smaller dairies that you can then go to the grocery store and grab that cheese and say, hey, Casey grew the grain that made that cow make this cheese. And that's incredible. And so I guess the simple answer is support the organic program. And if we can support the organic program, it really lifts all of agriculture. It's unbelievable that we have a law and we have inspectors that come to farms that consumers can trust. And I know there's some discussion around, can they trust it if big corporations get involved? And basically, what is it? We don't have an alternative to that. So it's an incredible phenomenon that we need to continue to support and know that it really lifts all of ag.